So I have started the recording. I hope that's okay with everyone. There are some people who can't make tonight, so we decided that if we recorded it, that would make the sessions available to a wider audience. So welcome to Riversdale Ward. Thank you for coming. My name is Ray Peck and I'm your host tonight. I live in Glenferrie Ward. Sarah Hegarty is your co-host, and Sarah will manage your questions in the chat. And Sarah lives in Junction Ward. We are both on the committee of Lighter Footprints. And the retiring councillor in Riversdale Ward is Susan Bigger, who I think is joining us tonight. We thank Susan sincerely for her dedication, her hard work, her excellent communication, and her passion for the environment in particular. There are three candidates standing in Riversdale Ward. Regrettably, only one, Rob Baillieu, is joining us tonight. Thank you, Rob, for making yourself available. After a bit of housekeeping, Rob, I'll hand over to you. We've had no response from candidate Wayne Kelly, and the third candidate, Priscilla Duncan, said she was considering the invitation the last time we heard from her. Our purpose of the Candidates Forum is for the candidates to introduce themselves to you and to respond to your questions. Residents can then cast more informed votes. It's democracy at work. While there's always a climate and environment focus in Lighter Footprints forums, questions on other topics can be taken tonight, time permitting. Please enter your questions into the chat at any time, and Sarah will monitor the questions and ask them on your behalf. Questions on similar topics will be combined for efficiency. If you're unfamiliar with Zoom, the Zoom menu should be visible at the bottom of your screen. You should see a chat button. If you click on that, the chat window should appear, and at the bottom of the chat window is a place where you enter and send your question. You may need to click in it before you can type into it. So without further ado, let's get started. Rob, you have 5 minutes to introduce yourself and answer the three questions that were provided to candidates in advance. Sarah will place those questions now into the chat. All right, thank you, Sarah. And after that, after Rob's 5 minutes or 6 minutes are up, Sarah will put your questions to Rob, and we'll conclude when there are no more questions or it's 9 o'clock, whichever comes first. Okay, so I hope that's clear to everybody. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Ray. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's very nice to see some familiar names and faces. It's especially nice to see Susan Bigger here, Councillor Susan Bigger. I actually ran in 2020 as a candidate in Riversdale Ward, and I didn't know that Susan was running at the time. I decided to call up the other candidates. I called up Susan, and at the end of the phone conversation, I put the phone down and I thought, wow, she's good. I want to vote for her. And she won, and she did an amazing job over the last 4 years, and a lot of the good community work that's happened on climate action and other fronts can be credited to her hard work as our local representative. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Rob Baillieu. I've got a background in philosophy, politics, economics. I'm a volunteer manager professionally, and I'm also a part-time member of the Australian Army, which I do in between full-time and part-time as an engineer. My interest in politics really started with marriage equality back in the day, in 2017. And then in 2020, I ran for council. At the end of that council run, I got invited to a small library meeting with 20 other people that were very interested in climate action. And in that meeting in that library, and Camberwell Library, we formed a group called Voices of Kooyong that went on to uh, advocate quite strongly on climate action and other issues that we felt were not being taken seriously locally at the federal level across Kooyong and Boroondara. That resulted in the election of Dr. Monique Ryan and subsequent contests by independents at the state elections, all of which I strongly believe has helped shape the way in which politicians locally now view the importance of climate action and engaging with the community. I feel really excited every time I see someone door knocking around locally, because I know they've been inspired to do so in part by the good work of Voices of Kooyong and the way that those volunteers and those community members got out there and contributed to our democracy. In terms of climate and the 3 questions that have been put in the chat, I am running as a priority on climate action. That's my number one cause for getting involved. I think our council has an okay climate action plan, but a fundamentally weak one when we consider the work being done by other councils and also the scale of the challenge we're facing. I want to see council do more to lead on this front, and not just motherhood statements and consultancy fees and so forth. I mean actually reducing emissions and helping people lower their power bills. Real, meaningful transition to renewables. When it comes to new initiatives for the council, I'd like to see actual investment in emissions reductions and the reduction in power bills. So my biggest red flag for anyone talking climate is they start talking to you about waste or sustainability or the environment, and they ignore emissions reductions and they ignore energy and power because they don't want to talk about that because it's the hard stuff. We have a $14 million surplus on this council. That's enough theoretically to upgrade every year 5,000 homes with solar. When I proposed that idea to one of our sitting councillors, they labelled me a socialist, unrealistic, out of touch. 1 week after that, Melbourne City Council announced they were going to do the exact same idea because we've got the money and we've got the time and we've got the impetus to invest back in the community, support people who are doing it tough in a cost of living crisis to lower power bills and also reduce emissions at the same time. And that's what good local leadership is about. So for me, it'll all be about the practical when it comes to initiatives to reduce emissions locally. Whether that's through interest-free loans that get paid out of your rates to install solar, whether that's through grants that are means tested, whether that's through setting up EV charging stations across the electorate, or ensuring council buildings are actually not powered by gas, but are powered by renewables. There are so many different things we can do and we should do. The 4th question was about community engagement. How can council better engage with residents and businesses on the issue of climate change? There's a fantastic organisation called Electrify Boroondara. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a community-led initiative that was designed to bring politicians from all sides of politics into the room and get them talking about climate in a meaningful and collaborative way. And it's been a wonderful success. I'm proud to have been involved in the early foundation of it. And I think the next step for council on community engagement and climate is to give full-throated support to Electrify Boroondara. Unfortunately, I think Electrify Boroondara has asked council a few times now for certain degrees of support, and council's failed to deliver on a lot of those. I think the fact that so many community members are getting involved at the grassroots level, that's exactly where you should be investing time and money. And hopefully council will do exactly that when we see the results come through in mid-November. That's probably enough from me, Ray.
Thank you very much, Rob. That is right on time. How did you do that? Very impressive, and some nice detail in there that I'm sure people might like to follow up on with some of their questions that you can talk more at length if you'd like to. Yeah, I was interested to hear about you think that the council can do more because there are other councils who are doing more when it comes to climate change and emissions reduction. So just while Sarah's getting some questions from the chat, I might just sneak one in of my own. So can you give us, you've already given us Melbourne City Council perhaps as one example of a council that's doing more. Is there another council or a different council action that impresses you that you think might transfer across to Boroondara?
So the one that first hooked me in on what council can achieve was actually Dooravan Council back in 2020, where they were putting forward these interest-free loans that got paid out of your rates. So there was no real additional cost to you as a resident. You were just effectively choosing that your rates were dedicated to providing you with free energy for your lifetime. Other councils that I've been engaging with a little bit, Nillumbik, a former mayor there, Peter Clark, him and I, he's a conservative fellow, but he's actually a really thoughtful and forward-thinking fellow when it comes to things like climate and transitioning houses over to make them more energy efficient, because he's got a background in architecture. They've got some really strong policy. It can get better, and it should get better. That's just two examples I can think of at the top line.
Fantastic.
Sorry, I keep forgetting to switch myself on. I'll hand over to you now, Sarah.
Yeah, sure. So Tony's asked a good question in the chat, Rob, which is to note that Boroondara Council has recently endorsed their tree canopy target, as many people in this room will know. Tony suggests that the existing target seems very modest and asks whether you see any possibility to be more ambitious.
We can always be more ambitious. I'm a big fan of increasing the tree canopy locally. There's a reason people move to Boroondara. It's the leafy green, happy suburbs. I know there's a real balancing act when it comes to facilitating development and upgrades to properties and preserving historical or significant trees. I don't think there's an easy solution or answer to that. There is plenty of parkland and green spaces that we could be expanding with greater tree coverage. And there are streets across Boroondara we could be upgrading. Right now, I'm on a street just outside, which doesn't have a nature strip, but is very wide, and you could easily plant trees all up and down it. It seems like a very easy solution. It would cost a bit of money. It would cost a bit of time and effort, but it's worthwhile to keep the community green and leafy.
That's definitely something we value. And I learned recently that Boroondara actually, in the original Indigenous language, has a meaning similar to leafy area, which I think is lovely. Connected to your first point there about finding the balance between preserving green spaces and improving our existing infrastructure and buildings, Annie Ryan would be keen to hear your thought about proposed activity centres, e.g. housing builds, and the role council can play regarding climate implications of the big build.
Yep, for those who aren't aware, Camberwell Junction has been earmarked by the state government for a significant increase in housing. The reason for this, the logic underlying it, is one, it's on public transport routes, which is facilitates increases in housing, theoretically, but also because we're in the middle of a housing crisis. I've door-knocked a couple thousand homes across Riversdale now, and the overwhelming majority of people agree that we all want our kids to be able to live where they grew up, close to their families. That's a sentiment that's pretty strongly held. That does mean we'll need more housing locally. It's pretty much unaffordable for most young people at the moment. However, Increases in housing require increases in amenities. They require consideration for heritage and character in the neighbourhood. They require consultation with the community. And they require pretty thorough collaborative planning. And I think it's pretty clear that we haven't really got that with the plan that's been put forward by the state government. I wouldn't suggest that the state government's plan even really is a plan so much as just a theoretical proposal. I'm fairly convinced, based on discussions I've had with people all across the community and involved in this area, that the state government will scale back the plan, in part because it's unsustainable. We just genuinely just can't achieve the housing targets. The construction industry is not set up for that at present. I know there are people in the community that really want me to either be full on pro-heritage, no development, and then there's people who are very open-minded about bring them in. I can't afford to keep paying rent. I want to buy a property locally. I actually think that leadership is about finding the balance and negotiating well. I think a new council can reset the relationship Boroondara Council has with the state government and potentially negotiate a better deal. Because at the moment, I think it's a bit strained, and maybe just some new faces and new names can reset that.
Yes, it's definitely an interesting balance to have to strike. I'm a homeowner myself in the Camberwell Junction catchment area, so I'll be following whatever the new council does with a lot of interest there. We probably have some questions later on about engagement with the state and federal levels of government, but going back to your remarks about Electrify Boroondara, you said that there's room for a more full-throated support for Electrify Boroondara from the council. Now, noting that there is a Electrify Boroondara consultative committee already in place on the council, possibly including Susan Biggar from memory. Yes, she's nodding her head. Can you describe what a more full-throated support for Electrify Boroondara would look like in your view?
So I don't know full details of it, but I know that Electrify Boroondara applied for support when it came to grants from the council. And those grants were not approved by the council. You couldn't think of an organisation more deserving of it when you talk about the ability to mobilise community members, run a really successful expo that attracts thousands of people, unites political parties from across the entire spectrum, gets the state opposition leader, the federal member, local Labor leaders and MPs, and the Greens all in one room agreeing with each other. That's a monumental achievement. When it comes to next steps, I think there's a huge role to play in going to people's homes and advising them on how to upgrade. A lot of people just genuinely don't know what's involved and think it's too complex to electrify their homes or improve energy efficiency, so they don't. EB has a role to play in providing education locally, and there's no reason that the council couldn't formalise or support that relationship a bit more and help them in getting out there and providing education, whether that's through grants that support training so volunteers know how to go to a house and provide advice on how they could upgrade, whether that's getting flyers out that advertise state programs and council programs or incentivize upgrades, or potentially even just taking on the principles and ideas of Electrify Boroondara themselves and letting it be a genuinely council-run initiative. I'm not saying it would necessarily be Electrify Boroondara. They might want to do their own thing still, but there's no reason that the council shouldn't be out there with council staff, approaching people, means-tested attitude towards upgrades and saying, look, would you like us to assist you installing solar, potentially for free? And I reckon a lot of people would say yes.
Okay, not to not to disagree with the argument for more involvement there, But I'm tempted to note that Electrify Boroondara do already provide home energy guides, which perform a home visit and an energy assessment. And the council has a similar program. Can you describe how you'd like to see us go beyond what's already available?
Yep. So it's making it easier to do.
Okay.
Funding, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. So I think that John announced at this in the written statement earlier on that David read out, complemented Lighter Footprints on as an organisation, and we also have Electrify Boroondara. We have two good, strong community groups, I think, in this location that you can't say exists everywhere. So I think we're starting from a strong position when it comes to reducing community emissions, which was one of the things you were talking about. Most of Boroondara's emissions come from the community. We have council buildings, and the council has made a good step forward, I think, with its purchase of 100% renewable energy. That's terrific. But we need to do more to reduce community emissions, because that's the bulk. But I think, we've got, as you say, Electrify Boroondara doing wonderful work. Two magnificent forums that have been held in the town hall, well attended by the community, but also well supported by people in the industry in particular, and some keynote addresses. So yeah, we've made a great start, and I think that it's great, Rob, hearing your ideas how we can take it further. One question I would like to ask you is about biodiversity. Boroondara has recently introduced a tree canopy strategy and implementation plan, and the same with biodiversity. Um, do you have any comments about the relationship and how we can, or do you have any concerns or ideas about biodiversity within this local government area? We have some, the Yarra River on one boundary, and some creeks and streams as well, with some original natural vegetation. But have you thought much about biodiversity, Rob?
Just writing down some notes because you raised a few different points there. Riversdale covers Gardeners Creek as well as parts of the Yarra. It's actually a really big part of the community and an important part of why we all live here. Councillor Victor Franco, who's the councillor for Garden, I was chatting with him only on Sunday about some biodiversity corridor ideas he has. He wants to set up some new things across that area, and he's been the architect of the Gardeners Creek Master Plan, which I'm a big fan of. I've spoken to residents who are very interested in the idea of getting rid of the concrete on Gardeners Creek and basically enabling it to regenerate as a biodiversity corridor. I've spoken to residents who want to see nature strips opened up for planting. Some of the prettiest streets in Boroondara are actually those areas where we don't just have lawns, but we actually have natural flora and fauna. The concern that people tend to have around that is rats or pests and things coming back into the area. There are actually solutions to that. There's a group along Morang Road who really want to set up a community garden in the nearby park, and they feel that they won't be able to do it because of rats. I door knocked a well-renowned botanist only 3 weeks ago who gave me some mint, which she explained rats can't get within 50 meters of, and she plants it around her community gardens that she has out in the country, and it basically keeps the rats entirely away. So you could plant it around community gardens and sort of a nice, simple solution that enables greater biodiversity, greater community involvement in nature. that kind of attention to detail, I really, really like. And I don't think that would have come up unless I had knocked on her door.
That's a great story. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I belong to one of the veggie gardens in Boroondara, the one at Hawthorn behind the Oval there, Glenferrie Oval, and we certainly have rats there. I'll pass that tip on to the gardeners, and we'll give it a go. At the moment,
I've got the mint growing in my garden. You can have some.
right. Well, just need to find out the name of it as well. Okay. Do you have another question for Rob, Sarah?
I do actually. I've got a related question, pertaining to biodiversity. Zara Brown asks whether you see a cat curfew coming to Boroondara anytime soon, and what your position might be on that.
So I assume the logic of a cat curfew, Sarah or Zara, was it?
Zara was the questioner there. Yes.
Yeah, I assume I haven't encountered it while door knocking. I assume the logic though is that cats do have a habit of killing native animals.
That's my understanding, yes. The rationale for the curfew.
I haven't seen any information or detail on this to make an informed judgment or opinion, but the lack of community interest would suggest to me that it's unlikely in the near future. Because I've door knocked a lot of people, I've spoken to thousands of residents locally, and this is, I guess, the first time I'm hearing it. But if you want to tell me about it, I'd be delighted to learn more.
Yep. I think, Zara, we'd welcome more questions. I don't know that I can unmute you, unfortunately, but you're welcome to share further details in the chat by all means. In the meantime, we might have a question from Annie, which is a good question. Noting that Rob did a great job mobilising community volunteers at the last federal election in your role with Monique Ryan's campaign. She notes that this is one way to get community engagement on reducing emissions and such things, and asks what potential you see for that same thing if you get on council.
Yep. So you have to be tricky around the remit of council, as well as conflicts of interest and this kind of stuff. And that's a real careful balancing act that I won't get into right now. I think the community engagement is Electrify Boroondara. That's doing the community work. Council coming up with organised, funded, council-led programs that EB can either slot into and support, or that support EB, are the ways to achieve more in that space. I think we've seen some real changes in our community over the last 3 years, where more and more people are engaged. I don't think I've ever seen such an active council election in my entire lifetime. There are signs everywhere, and there are people door knocking almost every ward. That's really good. Whether or not you support the candidates or their beliefs and values, the fact that they're out there listening to the community is fantastic. And we see that with EB. It's now got Liberal Party politicians who have been fighting climate action for a very long time in the room talking climate action. And that was just community engagement that achieved that.
Thanks, Rob. I know that climate is your key concern, but just shifting us a little bit to broaden the discussion. Do you have much knowledge about homelessness in Boroondara, and what do you think council might do about that? And also, you might like to perhaps broaden that and talk about social housing in Boroondara. You know, is there enough? You touched on it a little bit earlier on in regard to the Camberwell Junction development, but yeah, what about homelessness? Do you see it as an issue, and do you think we have enough social housing, or do you think we need more? And how can council help?
I think we've all seen homelessness locally. There used to be a young man who was on Glenferrie Road a few years ago, and he sadly passed away whilst homeless. And that had quite an impact at the time. We have some really good local services, but they're struggling financially. There's one about 150 meters away from me right now. There's other groups too that could be doing more in the space. So Hawthorn RSL, I'm quite keen to support the renovation of Hawthorn RSL. For those who don't know, it's one of the most active RSLs in the country, but it's pretty dilapidated. Their original renovation plans were going to include 3 bedrooms upstairs to house veterans who were struggling with mental health and homelessness. And a lack of financial support has meant they've actually scaled back those ambitions. So not getting the support they need, state, federal, or local, not fighting homelessness. When it comes to social housing, affordable housing and community housing, I'm really, really passionate about it. I think the QRSCV site on Denmark Street, which hopefully you're all familiar with, it's being earmarked for demolition and for additional housing to be built there. There is no reason that couldn't be a great project in community social housing and affordable housing. But the state government has earmarked very, very little of it for those reasons, which means it probably won't achieve much when it comes to alleviating that problem locally or across the state, which is really disappointing and, in my opinion, a failure of leadership from the state government. Other examples of success locally are Bill Street. I know there are residents who find the increase in traffic congestion really frustrating, and I understand that. Auburn Road is probably the busiest road in Boroondara at this point, but Bill Street has provided meaningful services to people who have insecure housing, whatever it may be, and that's a worthwhile investment. And the more we can do of that in the middle of a housing crisis that's only getting worse and worse every year, the better.
Housing is definitely a big issue. I might just jump in, sorry, Ray, to piggyback onto another good question in the chat. Thanks, Ying. So along the lines of this discussion of sustainable development and the need for social housing, she notes that Victoria is adopting higher energy performance of new builds of 7 stars. Can Boroondara Council provide fast track approvals or reviews for builds or renovations that go above and beyond to incentivise more energy efficient residential buildings?
I don't know if they can, but I like the idea and I'd like to learn more about it. I know a resident was proposing to me the other day that there should be a discount to your rates if you've got a certain degree of energy efficiency, which was quite an interesting idea. Might not suit people who are in apartments or places that they can't get support in redeveloping or upgrading. I'd like to learn more about the idea, Ying, and potentially take it up if elected.
I know that there's a number of Electrify Boroondara members who have gone a very long road in making their own homes energy efficient. So they have a lot of wisdom to offer, in my experience. So it can be done here in Boroondara, but yeah, I'm also not sure what councillors' capacities there are. I might ask another quick question from Wendy. So Wendy asks in the chat whether you support more car parks or a genuine effort to make active or public transport the easy choice. Would you support trialling a bike bus or walking bus to school to reduce school traffic and improve health? And do you support council advocating for secure bike or scooter parking at Boroondara stations?
I'm a cyclist. I have a Propel Advanced 2 Giant, which I love, and you can often find me struggling on the Kew Boulevard or going super fast around the Velodrome in Riversdale. So to the extent to which we can encourage more people cycling locally, amazing. I'd love to support the Hawthorn to Box Hill bike trail and see if we can connect other trails across the area. In terms of secure bike and scooter parking at Boroondara stations, for train stations and the likes, I think that's a really, really good idea. I suspect we probably have to cooperate with state government there because who owns the property varies quite significantly. But yeah, excellent idea. Let me just add that to the list. A bike bus or walking bus to school to reduce school traffic, I think, is probably inevitable. When we talk about the population and housing targets for the area, we are going to get to the point where we either achieve a New York style level of congestion, or we start investing seriously in public transport and alternate means of getting around. That can be bikes, that can be buses, that's great. The other option is just, in order to facilitate that though, we need better paths. So I was talking earlier about Bill Street. There's also the Melbourne Uni site there, which is earmarked for, I think, about 500 homes. For those who are aware, that's a lot of homes, 750 odd homes on Auburn Road in an area with very little access to public transport. Door knocking there literally this morning, a resident suggested why not a bike path across the highway connecting Kooyong Station and shortening that trip significantly. I've seen similar bike paths in other parts of the state. Could be a great way to make that station a viable outlet for those people, because at the moment it's a very, very long walk. It's over 1 kilometre. And if it's a simple bike path, either over or under, it's a good solution. And your first question, which is, do you support more car parks or a genuine effort to make active public transport the easy choice? I think it's a balancing act. If you talk to businesses, they will fight tooth and nail to protect car parks. And you do need to ensure that you have a good amount of car parking locally to support businesses, but also support residents. Public transport, I'm a huge fan of. One of the challenges we have in Boroondara is very few of our stations are actually wheelchair or pram accessible, or trams. And even some of the train stations aren't really accessible for wheelchairs. So for example, Glenferrie Station, it's a very steep ramp. I've had 2 wheelchair users who've come to me and said, not viable, we can't do that. Never have, never will. And then I've had plenty of mums, plenty of dads who have said, can't get the pram onto the tram. To facilitate that, we are going to need to raise roads in certain areas, which does mean removing some car parks. I know I was talking to the head of the Glenferrie Traders Association, Sam Aldermere. He's concerned it could mean potentially 100 car parks lost on Glenferrie Road at the most extreme level, which would have an impact on local businesses. I think and he agrees that there is a middle ground, which is having 1 or 2 spots, the loss of about 30 or 40 car parks, and facilitating the undergrounding of car parks in other spaces. So again, it's not either or, it's a balancing act, which is never the fun answer, but is often the right answer when it comes to providing amenities and representing a pretty diverse community with a growing population, in my opinion.
Thanks, Rob. That's a very comprehensive answer. I'm going to shift it again. Do you have any feelings about celebrating or citizenship celebrations, whether or not they should be on the 26th of January, or do you have any feelings about citizenship on Australia Day?
Yep. So for those who aren't aware, I do a lot of volunteer management work. And last year I actually ran the state campaign for the ACT on the yes side of the referendum. So we won that campaign, and that was great. I got exposed to more Indigenous voices in that campaign than I ever have in my entire life. There's a real diversity of views about that particular issue between those who didn't want to take up the struggle and then those who really just wanted to emphasize to me that it is true that this day is upsetting for people. And if you can change the day and not upset people, why not? And even though that's basically entirely an emotional argument, I actually do find that really quite compelling. I would like to put it to consultation to the community, which is, I think, what was proposed by Reconciliation Boroondara, and see what the community thinks and feels about this. I sort of believe that this is actually a federal issue and that the federal government should be leading on this rather than this being a bottom-up approach. And I think that reflects a question of leadership at the federal level that maybe we all need to think about. But if we can do a consultation locally and see how the community responds, that'd be good, because this community voted overwhelmingly for the voice, and I'm quite proud of that.
Yes, that's a good point about Kooyong's vote, pro-voice. So that's an interesting response from my perspective. Susan, it's great to have you here. Someone has wondered whether or not if I can work out how to unmute you. You're unmuted.
I think I am.
Given your experience on council and the fact that you're here tonight, would you be willing to give us some insight about what you think might be the challenges facing Boroondara Council, particularly when it comes to reducing community emissions and doing more on climate action?
Sure, I'm happy to. I apologize, I've got a bit of a cold today, so I'm glad I'm not in the same room with any of you. And I was of two minds about coming, because I don't in any way want to upstage Rob. I'm thrilled that he's here, and it's a really it's a positive sign that we have that we don't, even though we don't have three candidates, that we have one who's committed enough to the climate and obviously very motivated by it to come to this, because this is really fundamentally important, I think, this event. I mean, this is my first answer was the obvious one, which is the biggest challenge that is faced is the nature and the makeup of the council. And so what people are doing right now by coming, and what they will do over the next few weeks, as they get their ballot. I don't know about others here, but I got mine today. So as we're talking to people who are getting their ballots, I think really emphasizing that a stand on climate is the stand that your councillor takes on climate is fundamentally important. When it comes down to it, I mean, one councillor by themselves will struggle. You need six really to make any decision. And so I think that's the first thing I would say. I think the other, I think you're right, Rob and Ray and others who said tonight that it's fantastic that we've got several community groups who are committed to climate action. And I think that regardless of the makeup of council, I think that if we really want to, and we have to get climate action moving, the next best thing is even if you end up in a ward with a councillor who doesn't seem to be particularly supportive, is making your voice heard. There are it's very hard to ignore significant numbers of emails in your inbox and phone calls and things like that. I know, even though it can seem frustrating, and maybe not every councillor is as responsive as others to that, I do think it helps. So I think that's but I'm meant to be giving Rob some suggestions that he can respond to, or some challenges. I think I think he's spoken really, really well about a lot of the things that we're facing. And I think that balance between community action, I mean, at the end of the day, that is actually all that it's about now, because council more or less has, well, there's still things to be done, but more or less council is getting on top of its own emissions. So it's about how it enables all of us to live better and to make better decisions, to make better purchases, to make better, all sorts of choices about how we live. So I think he's right in saying about Electrify Boroondara, that, or something like that, and really supporting that. I'd be interested to know. I think one of the challenges probably has been funding. We don't have maybe as much funding put to some initiatives. So it'll be really interesting to think about, well, if you did have more funding, where you'd spend it. I think that'll be something to be thinking about, with the hope that would happen, meaning that more funding would come, because you certainly can always use more staff thinking about this and working on it and focusing on it. I don't know, Rob, has that given you anything to respond to?
I've had the privilege of chatting to Susan a fair bit over the years, and I know where the challenges lie. Locally, in that we have had councillors who've been sceptical about climate action. We've had councillors who have been aware it's important, but view it as politically inconvenient for either themselves or their allies to support it, which is probably even more disappointing than just being skeptical of it. And then we've had people who just haven't felt the need to go further. They feel like they've done enough. A new council hopefully means new people, new ideas, new impetus. I think the success of Kooyong Climate Change Alliance, Lighter Footprints, Electrify Boroondara, these organisations and their impact is definitely in the minds of current councillors. And you can see that in the way they interact with these organisations, and the fact that so many different political parties are now on side with Electrify Boroondara. I'd be interested to see what we can do in terms of pushing the remit of council to take action on climate action. And I think that's something I probably need to discuss more with Susan if I'm elected. Because whilst it's fun having really strong, passionate ideas, at the end of the day, we do have to comply with governance and rules and a mandate from the state government on what we can do. So that would be probably my next step for talking with Susan and finding out what comes next.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Susan, as well. Susan, I've got one more follow on from what you said, and Rob might want to come back as well. That's the relationship between Boroondara councillors and residents in the councillor's ward. You mentioned that it's hard it's hard to ignore. I think that was the word you said, multiple emails and phone calls. Is that typical? How often do councillors get multiple emails and phone calls, and what do they tend to be about? What can Rob expect if he gets elected?
So there are quiet times and there are very busy times, and it can. I mean, there's certainly a steady flow of emails from residents and other people, but when I think over the 4 years, there have been, a few times where it really peaks. Right now, I've had quite a lot in my inbox recently even though it's caretaker mode right now, over the state government's plans for Campbell Junction and concern about that, and the lack of detail and frustration. And so it's, I mean, I think in general, when people don't have information that can be very, nerve-wracking for them. And so I think that's so there have been specific, sort of big issues like that. When we have a decision coming up, you might get, I would say it would be a significant number to get sort of 20 emails on one issue. Say if we had a planning meeting coming up, or if we had a council meeting which was addressing a particular, we actually, when I think about it, over time, I probably got more than that about recently about the canopy cover issue and the concern about, and the tree strategy in general. There's a lot of concern about how we address that, and people feeling that was a low target, which some of us agreed about. So certainly there will be. I mean, of course, I don't know what happens in other people's inboxes, and other councillors might find it easier to ignore. But I think that that's probably one of our fundamental responsibilities, is to respond. And what I thought you were going to ask, actually, Ray, was that what if you happen to be in a ward where you're not getting any responses, and you feel that you're being ignored? And I certainly have had residents from other wards write and say that that's been their experience. And my view would be then you write to all councillors, so that there is a so that everybody can see, and you might even start off by saying, I am a resident of so-and-so ward, but I'm writing to all councillors to express my concerns and something like that, because then there is visibility about it. And then when we have conversations, we can all say, well, we've all seen the number of emails coming in about the tree canopy or about our climate targets, and no one can deny that, so to speak, or say, oh, I haven't heard a thing. I've certainly heard that said before on issues that I was very surprised to imagine that they hadn't had any emails. So it is about that visibility, I think, and really ensuring that if you're feeling a little bit of a dead end in your own ward, that you just make sure that all councillors are hearing that message.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Thank you for saying that. So do you follow up every individual email that you receive?
I certainly follow every email that is written to me alone. If it's written to all, right when I say that, of course, I'll probably have missed one, and somebody's going to put their hand up and say, "Oh, you never wrote back to me," but I try to.
Yeah.
If they're written to 10 of us and they've CC'd Anthony Albanese and Monique Ryan and everybody else, no. So
Sure.
you do,
Sure. Yeah.
within reason.
Yeah. Okay.
And certainly phone calls I don't get as much. I mean, but you still, I had somebody on the phone this morning about their waste collection. We do have a lot of conversations about that and road issues and so on. So yeah, I mean, those are some of the nicest things that if Rob is elected, he will really enjoy, actually, because in general, people are delightful and very grateful that you're taking the time to talk to them, even though, of course, it is your role to do that.
Thanks very much, Susan. Rob, do you want to come in at this point before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, there's only one thing I worry about when it comes to elected officials, is they often end up talking to the people that are talking to them. One thing I really admired about Susan was that she got out into the community. You could regularly see her at the farmers market, publicly accessible, reaching out to people. For me, my way of trying to find the balance there is door knocking. The person that's not coming out of their home is exactly the kind of person I want to speak to, and try and invite them out into the community. So I apologize. If you do elect me, I probably will keep door knocking. And I probably will keep trying to talk to you, whether or not you want me to or not.
Well, that'd be wonderful if you were prepared to put in that much time and effort to connect with Riversdale residents, Rob. I think it's a great idea, especially in your first term, to do that. Folks, I'm aware that I don't think we have any more questions in the chat, but we still do have time. So if something that Rob or Susan has said, don't be afraid. This is your chance. Type it into the chat, and Sarah or I can ask it for you. And if there are no more questions, we'll probably finish up in about 5 minutes. Sarah, do you have a question that you would like to put to Rob, or a comment?
Not a question, but a comment. I'll note that Wendy has provided a link in the chat, Rob, where you can learn more about the issue of free roaming cats. If that's an item of interest to you. It's definitely an issue that I've heard about, the impact of free roaming cats on native wildlife. I think Melbourne Zoo had a big campaign about it a couple of years ago. So it is out there. Thank you, Wendy. I think Zara's left us, but good thing to raise. I guess a comment from me personally is how good it is to hear from yourself, Susan. Thank you for chiming in without notice. I think most of Boroondara should be receiving the Kooyong Climate Change Alliance's candidate scorecards in their ward, in their mailboxes any day now. Now we haven't scored you, Susan, as a retiring councillor, but I feel we should note that Susan scores very well on support for climate issues on an objective assessment of past climate motions. So what an excellent person to give advice to incoming candidates. Fantastic to have you here. Thank you for coming along. There's another note in the chat here just pointing out from Annie Ryan the importance of Boroondara becoming a real player in working with the state and federal governments and helping raise the bar on climate matters. I couldn't agree more, Annie. And Rob, this is something you might have a view on. Do you see good strategies for Boroondara Council to engage with state and government levels of government?
I think what we've seen recently, what happens when Boroondara doesn't engage, we get backlash like the Camberwell Junction plan, where the state just enforces things without us. I would love to see council, state and federal working together more collaboratively, and I think we can do.
A related question from Noel, thank you Noel, is around the state government plans for the Camberwell Junction plan and catchment area. He notes that these plans may change, but he'd like to hear your views and policies on maintaining the heritage protection overlays in Boroondara.
So I'm happy to be corrected by Susan, but my understanding is all the heritage studies across Boroondara have now been basically completed. So having a good chat with Victor Franco about it this weekend. The catchment does extend out quite far, and it does cover a lot of heritage homes, especially within Riversdale, around Urquhart Street and between Taronga Road and Auburn Road, and a little bit around Munro Street as well. I think that this is kind of a political act, to be honest, in that I think they've put out a plan that they know they can't achieve and won't achieve in order to kick the community a bit into understanding that this is an important issue and that they'll scale it back. That's just my political brain coming into the fore. I think there needs to be responsible, respectful and collaborative advocacy on this. I won't be supporting any advocacy from council that is deliberately confrontational or not something that any reasonable policymaker in state government can respond to in a collaborative manner. So yeah, I think it actually will just come down to the personalities of the people involved and the skill and diplomacy with which they negotiate and advocate for protecting the heritage locally.
Yes. Relatedly, Addie notes that she thinks we're getting a Glenferrie activity centre too. Any thoughts on that as a possibility?
Whether there's been a long-running plan for changes and upgrades in Glenferrie Road, Susan might have a bit more detail on it than I do. I haven't deep dived into it yet.
If you're happy, so I think I presume you were asking Annie about a state plan for it. There is a locally in terms of local government, we have our own Glenferrie Place plan, which has been passed within the last probably 18 months, similar to how we passed a Camberwell Place plan, and in part it was. Once we were particularly aware that there was going to be an activity center, it looked like for Camberwell, I think it was really important that council said, got in there and said, well, this is, we know that we need more densification in Camberwell Junction, and here's how we think it could happen, and here's the heights and so on. I mean, I think it was likely that was probably the numbers were going to be coming in too low. We were saying 1,500 new dwellings in Camberwell, and then it's looking more like 6,000 or something. But although even these numbers, as Rob said, he's right. We don't really know if those numbers will stick or not. We probably should know by Christmas. In terms of Glenferrie, that was a question I asked last night, or when we were discussing this at council, and what officers think will be that this will mean for the next step. And to be honest, it's all speculation. I mean, I think it's very likely there will be other centers, in part because the housing goals, the numbers that are being discussed by the state government are, far exceed what you could possibly put into those 10 activity centers. And so there's always been plans that there'll be more activity centers. And I think we think it's highly likely there'll be an activity center for Glen Ferry and for Kew, or a state goal, a set of goals. I can't imagine the numbers are going to be at that size. They're just they're very, very large. And so, but again, it's really only speculation. And like Rob, I mean, I hope that there's really an opportunity to engage productively with the government on any future plans and on the current plans. I think it's the best way to do planning is with the community involved and engaged in it. I'm hopeful that I think none of us really know why they would pick the actual layout that's been chosen at Camberwell, given how much of it is covered by heritage overlay, because that's going to make building 6 stories very, very problematic in most of those sites, for instance. But we'll see. And I think if we're able to have a more have a productive relationship with the state government moving forward, that would be great. And hopefully they will, while they are in a hurry to get this done, hopefully they will prioritize that kind of community engagement. So, but can I just say thank you. I didn't intend to speak. I'm sorry, Rob, and thank you so much for allowing me to do that and for being here. It's delightful to know that there's real potential for the ward to go forward in good hands.
No, I don't think you need to apologize for speaking. I think that the people in this Zoom session are very lucky. I think it's added great breadth and depth to hear you speak, Susan. And I know I can tell from Rob's response that he's really appreciated that you already have a good relationship. But we don't often get to have conversations like this with our councillors, Susan. So I feel quite privileged that you're here tonight and that you've been willing to speak without any notice. So thank you. I'd just like to develop this a tad more, given that we still have people hanging on, and that's great. The relationship between residents and councillors, we have groups like Lighter Footprints, which sometimes probably annoy councillors. Maybe we don't sometimes go about things as well as we could. And then sometimes residents could probably be more proactive than what they are as well. So we would find this happy balance and the right way of doing things. I know in my ward, Wes Galt has regular opportunities for residents to come and talk to him at a location that he promotes. That's one way to do it. I know that we can give deputations to council, we can ask questions to council. Rob, have you been to many council meetings? And is there things that you think are working well and things that aren't working as well as they should be in terms of resident council relationships?
I have real concerns about the closed door meetings that happen. So there are meetings that are available to the public, and then there are meetings that aren't. It's difficult for me to comment or know whether or not they benefit the council, because I've never been involved in one, because I can't be involved in one as a member of the community. And that's a transparency concern. Maybe there's a legitimate reason. Maybe those meetings are really productive and beneficial. Susan may be able to say something on that. I'm going to door knock. I'm probably going to keep doing the farmers markets with Susan, even if it's just so I can get some of the tarts and sausage rolls they have there, which are fantastic. I think one of the most problematic things that I see regularly with councillors is councillors who aren't introspective. So they don't take criticism or feedback. They don't wonder, what can I do better? What can council do better? I had one particular councillor I sat down with 3 months ago and I said, I just wanted to let you know there are community members, about 30 people now, who have raised these concerns about your conduct. How do you feel about that? And that councillor's response was, I'm perfect, which was quite a surreal experience. I never feel perfect. And you can sometimes see that in the way that they respond to residents. Some of our councillors have gained some notoriety in the news when they've responded to residents in a way that was less than respectful. I'm privileged in that I have door knocked so much that I've become very accustomed to talking to people that I disagree with. And I know that the best thing you can do is disagree in the most polite and respectful way. Because at the end of the day, you all have to live with each other. You're from the same community, and you benefit when you work and listen together.
Yes, I suppose being a member of council is being part of a team. And it sounds like, there are some personality traits that might annoy you from time to time, Rob. How would you deal with that? Would you fire up, or do you have some other strategies that you've developed to work with people who annoy you?
I don't allow myself to get annoyed. You may hear a background in philosophy and 8 years in the army coming out a bit when I talk about principles and virtues and values. But cooperation, collaboration, and respect are the baseline for when it comes to successful team environments. And I think where councils often fail catastrophically and go into administration is when councillors stop working with each other and start fighting each other, start getting into the news, attacking each other. That's not good. That's really, really unhealthy. It's a massive disservice to the community. So there's no councillors that I'm unprepared to work with, and there will never be a councillor I'm unprepared to work with, as far as I'm concerned.
That's good to hear.
That is good.
Over to you, Sarah.
Oh, I was just going to, noting that we're running short on time, I just see one perhaps last good question in the chat, which might pertain to working with other councillors. But going back to this theme of, plans for development in Boroondara, as we've noted, there are already many well-developed plans, and Rod points this out in the chat. He asks how Rob will prioritise the implementation of these existing plans and get some traction on them.
So many different things go into prioritization lists, and I love making priority lists. It's something I do pretty much every day in my professional job. And it is never easy because you need to balance the strategic with the tactical, with the administrative, with the personal. So as a local councillor, you want to advocate for your ward and the interests of your ward fiercely. But at the end of the day, you actually do need to represent the views and values of the wider Boroondara. This may sound a little bit crazy, but whilst I've been door knocking Riversdale, I've actually done about 150 doors in every single ward in Boroondara as well, just so I can get a little bit of a sense of what other people out there are thinking beyond my immediate community. Prioritizing it based on cost is obviously the very first and foremost consideration you have to make. You see the Kew Recreation Centre, which has been a massive cost blowout. I think it was originally meant to be 70 million, now it's 140 million. The Kew Library redevelopment, which many residents up there are indicating is perhaps not necessary. That's where you can have mature and reasonable conversations about what is a priority and what is not. I know there'll be councillors that don't necessarily think emissions reduction and climate action are a priority. Some may not see certain paths and trails and parks as a priority compared to others. A fair-minded approach with consideration for local advocacy and what is actually achievable and appropriate is really the only way you can prioritise things.
You want to work or not?
Well, thanks very much, Rob. I'm going to wrap it up now. It's getting close to 9 o'clock. I've found you very easy to listen to, Rob. You're on top of things, but more than that, you're committed and passionate. That's coming through quite strongly. So again, I'd like to thank you, Rob, for making the time to join us tonight. I'm sad that we didn't have the other two candidates that we could hear from as well, but so be it. I think you've conducted yourself really well. You've given very detailed and thoughtful responses. Your commitment to door knocking and meeting your residents is outstanding, I think, and I wish you all the best, Rob, in the election. And thank you also to everyone for attending tonight and asking some good questions. I'm sure you're happy with Rob's answers. And again, to you, Susan, it's great that you took the time to join us tonight, and you've added a lot of depth to and your experience to the conversation. So thanks again for that. So that brings the Lighter Footprints 2024 Candidates Forum to a close. If you don't get Lighter Footprints newsletters, you might like to by just going to our website, which is just lighterfootprints.org, and filling in the newsletter form, and then you'll be informed of events that are coming up this year and next year as well. So thanks again. Just click on the leave button, please, down the bottom right-hand corner, and you should exit the Zoom. So from me, from Lighter Footprints, good night and thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thought you're going to do a good night, good afternoon, and good morning.
Yeah, it's like the two Ronnies.
Oh,
Good
the
night
Truman
from
Show.
me.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rob. See you later.
Rightio.
I
Thank
guess
you, Ray. Thanks,
you'll
Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
end your recording, Ray, and that way
Yep.
we'll
Thank
make
you.
sure.
Thank you. I will do that now.